I am now live. Good. So unfortunately, Aaron had some technical issues with his phone, but he's now on his iPad and hopefully he'll be on the live stream pretty soon, I think. But for those who are just joining in, we were talking about the use of biocontrols um, for aphid management as well as sort of thrips. Those two pests are kind of the topic for this video series. For now, anyways. I did spend some time um, going over sort of like origins and where they came from and that sort of a thing with regards to thrips. And maybe I'll just take some time to talk about it now until he gets online and I see him in the comments. So, basically, I'm going to go over it really, really simply. Oh, here he is.
Okay, so I threw
Hey
my
there.
against the wall and it works again.
Good. Um, I think that I uploaded it to Instagram. The last part is an IGTV, but we'll see if that processes. It said it was processing. I didn't see anything after the fact, and I'm not really familiar enough with this new feature. I haven't seen this before, so whatever. But
Uh,
um, I'll
Instagram changes their
yeah.
stuff every day. So
That's true. That's true. So hopefully this will be recorded. If not, I'll probably be making a video on some of these subjects in the future, so it won't be lost. Just delayed a little bit.
cool.
Um, actually, did you want to finish your thought on aphids
Oh,
or
where was
what you were
I?
saying with fire controls?
Um,
Or did you maybe even already do that?
I think I probably did. I think I was rounding it all up um, in that uh, you're depending on their effectiveness, and with all of these things being the case, it's hard to depend on them as a biological control. Oh, we were talking about cages, I think, and I said I really like the cages idea. I was sort of googling
Hmm.
that idea, but we can push forward. I know everybody's been waiting for thrips, so let's talk about thrips.
Sure. I have because I'm biased and I wrote a bunch of notes about it to make sure I was uh, accurate.
Hit me with it.
It's related though. So here's the good segue. Thrips and aphids and really all hemiptera. So aphids, whiteflies, leafhoppers, treehoppers, stink bugs, those kinds of things with the sucking mouth parts. All those hemiptera. They're very closely related to the thrips, and they're also related to uh, what are called bark lice. So Socoptera. So Socodea is now the preferred order name. And uh, uh, the how did I pronounce this? The Phytheraptera, right? Basically they're parasites. They're lice.
Okay,
So so
so there's a
so
family of these.
say that again.
You were just going over them to mark that there's a large family of them.
Yeah, so thrips, uh, all the sucking mouthpart bugs, true bugs, as they're called, um, book lice, which are like sort of they look very similar to aphids actually, but they have mandibles, and sort of lice. So these four major groups they all came from the same basal ancestor, basically. And that happened like 437 million years ago or something, into the Devonian period. And it's a very, very, very long time. And like we were saying earlier, that's, very critical if you don't have an extinction event where everyone dies, then you can have cool things like this happen. And it kind of makes sense because the aphids and all those ones with the sucking mouth parts, they have a fused sort of like mouth part that allows them to kind of drink and pierce the plants. But thrips have like a single mandible, sort of. They have like an asymmetrical thing going on. So maybe there's a little bit of that like two becomes one, divergence going there. But
Uh-huh.
there's about 6,000 species of them, but most species are not pests. There's only a very small fraction that are pests of thrips, anyways. And so, but like so before there were thrips, there was this like hemipteroid that we kind of hypothetically think about that would eventually become these four groups and all of the species, right? And it probably fed on like debris, detritus from like plants and possibly animals. So that's where you get your lice and your book lice that kind of also are detrivorous and they feed on like decaying organic matter and stuff. They moved from that to pollen and fungi and spores and that sort of a thing.
Mhm.
And that's important because that kind of tells you that thrips have liked pollen since before they were thrips. A lot of insects were like that.
That's a very cool thought. Okay.
Yeah, and so they're all part of this group called Paraneoptera, and it's based on their wings. Pretty much, almost all insects have wings, and that they were the first ones to have wings, and it kind of defines them as a group.
Okay.
Basal insects, basal hexapods, anyways, that have 6 legs, don't have wings, and so they evolved from things that don't have wings. Now they have wings, and now they have tons of wings. All of the adults have wings for the most part, not
Hmm.
all, but like fleas and that kind of a thing. But I bring it up um, because I like talking about arcane nonsense, but also because like thrips have been around since about 260 million years ago. So even though I'm talking like twice that time period, the actual thrips as we know it probably came a little bit further along, and they moved from pollen and fungivory, so pollinivory and fungivory, pollen and fungi, to feeding on like the plant tissues we think of like leaves and stems and vascular tissue. And like most insects, when that happened, when they adapted to that, they exploded in their radiation. Essentially, that unlocked them. That unlocked for them the ability to feed on the most abundant carbohydrate resource on Earth, which is
Right.
still plants.
Yep.
Yeah, the sugars of plants in particular. So pollen is proteins and also carbohydrates and that sort of a thing, but um, plant phloem tissue with the sugars is the big thing that insects that are herbivorous really like. And then there was a movement from herbivory to sort of carnivory, and that didn't just happen once. Sometimes it happens and then they switch back, and that happens a lot of times,
What
and we don't know all the details.
do you know? Okay, so it might be a bad question, but are there have there been certain like events that set off the need for omnivory versus herbivory?
Almost assuredly. I imagine that I don't know all of the details, and perhaps nobody will ever really know all of the
Yeah.
details. But there are so extinction level events definitely sort of truncate the amount of things you can eat if you're relying on a certain source. If
Sure.
you're a predator and you're a carnivore, and the things that eat the plants aren't alive, then you will also not be alive.
Right.
Um, so eating lower on the trophic food scale is very advantageous because it allows you to move from that to that. People say of humans, and I don't know how true the veracity of this claim is, but I tend to agree because we see this also with other organisms like insects that a movement from herbivory to carnivory, it tends to have sort of you could say beneficial evolutionary effects because um, depending on the food source, proteins and the kinds of sort of nutrients that you're getting from other animals tend to be easier to kind of assimilate, digest. They tend to also be the same kinds of things you need because they're already in another living animal thing that's moving around doing what you're doing.
It's like drinking filtered
Um,
water.
what?
It's like drinking filtered water, already been filtered.
Yeah, exactly. Or like a soup, right?
Yeah,
Like it's all the
yeah,
nutrients all collected. You know, like when we make a soup, it's like that, right? Like you take all the vegetables, we pre-digest the vegetables in a broth, and then we
yeah.
drink the nutritious broth, and that's kind of how aphids work, honestly.
Yeah, okay. That's better than filtered water. Yeah.
They're raw vegan though. Well, but it makes a lot of sense, right? And there's a lot of filtration that's happening because people like to say, oh, Devin Rash says here in the comments, nutrient density increases with trophic level. Absolutely, right? And I like meat in my soup. So do I. So do
Okay.
I. So I'm not.
There's a,
The aphids.
yeah, okay. Yeah.
The aphids are raw vegan, I suppose you could say, with their soups.
Yeah. Yeah, I like
And
that.
But some Hemiptera, some of these bugs are like stink bugs. There's predatory stink bugs too. And I'm getting into the rabbit hole, so let me finish my thought for thrips. What do I have here? Um, I guess important things that make thrips thrips. They got the asymmetrical mandible. They've got sort of a cigar-shaped body plan, kind of. They can be very unique, though. They're very, very specious. Well, they're a small insect order, but they've got a lot of very unique groups, is what I should say. They've got a lot of unique species that have evolved kind of interestingly. And the way that they fly is probably their most unique trait. They've got feathery wings. They've got wings that have little hairs on them, and those hairs, in addition to how the wings are structured, allow them to what's called clap and flap, which is this way of generating air vortices, um, which might sound really cool, but pretty much anything that wants to get airborne has to do something like this to create vortices in the air. But what they do is they use these hairs because think of it like this: the sky is a really less dense ocean.
Yeah.
The atmosphere. The atmosphere is like an ocean, but there's less in it, right? So things that are sufficiently small kind of exist in the atmosphere like it is to swim, sort of. And that kind of helps people. That helps me think about aerodynamics and that kind of thing. So they can they're so small and they've got these hairs that allow them to kind of catch the air and release it. But there's a problem with that. And the reason why most insects don't do this is because it damages your wings. It's not good for their structure, so eventually they'll wear out their wings. Even other insects do this too, that don't have this sort of methodology, like honeybees. Like sometimes you'll find honeybees that are on the floor and you'll think, oh, it's a pesticide, or oh, it's a parasite. The worker honeybees are they're the oldest in the hive typically, so they probably just wore out their wings. And that's just how it happens. So yeah, and so the wings on thrips, they do like to get into crevices and that sort of thing. So their feathery hairs also protect them and protect their wings from degrading when they're mulling around in the crimps of a leaf that they might have caused a gall in or something like that. So that's how you can tell a thrip or a thrip. That's how you can tell a thrips. Thrips is plural and not plural for those who are wondering. And do I have one last thing here on my notes? Yeah, okay. Some thrips are social, I mentioned that, and some thrips species have populations that are sexual, and some of them are asexual. And hopefully because I use the word sexual and asexual, I don't get demonetized or something on YouTube when I upload this eventually. But it's crazy to me. Onion thrips, for example, there's populations that are just purely asexual, well, essentially, virtually purely asexual. And so they're females that make other females. And that's great for them because just like the aphids, they can make tons of themselves really rapidly and spread. But the craziness happens when the sexual populations meet up with the asexual populations because the advantage of sex, the major cost of sex, is that it's less efficient than asexual reproduction, right? So there's a big cost evolutionarily to having to have two partners. The advantage of it generally is that you end up getting a mixture of genes, and that can create advantageous mutations and adaptation. So what happens? You get the ones that have been spending all their time becoming advantageous, and then they share those genes with the asexual copiers, and you just print more of those.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And so sexual populations that are exposed to agrosystems and they get resistant to various toxins, which thrips are already really good at doing, which is why they're huge generalists because they can defeat the immune systems of plants. They can physically and physiologically, and they've been doing it for hundreds of millions of years, and they're very good at it. And so when we spray them with insecticides that are really noxious, that they're already really good at resisting, well, they get extra practice, and then they go and put those genes in asexual reproducers, and the damage continues.
Yeah, that's
And
an
that's all
incredible
I have on that.
thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
that's pretty mind blowing. Go ahead.
well, and so that's why you need biocontrols, I think. That's why it's helpful. But even biocontrols can be resisted because evolution. But it's a much faster, it's a much slower process usually, especially if you have organisms that are already adapted to thrips in some capacity, like the aureus. Did you have more on aureus?
Yeah. So the aureus that are indigenous to my area, well, the notes that I have about the aureus are, so the aureus that are indigenous to my area are they bite people too. So I discovered them 2 years ago, working under like a 13-foot tall plant that had been like palm tree lollipopped all the way up, so you could almost stand under it. And I'm standing under it pruning leaves, and I'm having these aureus fall all over my neck and arms, and I'm getting little bites and pricks everywhere, and I'm like, what the hell are these things? And I think that pretty much like started my interest in them. But I also discovered when I ordered aureus from BioBest that they didn't look the same. The ones that I ordered from BioBest were smaller, they were shinier, and they were one solid color. The aureus in my area had like 2 white spots on their wings.
Probably their wings.
What's that?
Sorry. Probably their wings. You're probably able to see their wings. Maybe there's no coloration or like whatever that. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different minute pirate bugs. There's a lot of different aureus out there. So that's interesting to consider, that you might have a native species that is better that's more adapted to the temperature, humidity, host plants. Some aureus do feed on plant tissues and pollen, so they might be better with that situation, right?
Right. And so these ones that I ordered were just not as effective. They, I can't really find them now that I've done 2 releases, and a week after I release them, I can't find them.
Which ones can you not find?
What's that?
Which ones can you not find?
The farm reared aureus from BioBest. But unfortunately, I also haven't found any indigenous aureus this year. And I wonder if introducing these maybe more competitive on some level aureus from BioBest has offset the natural ecology. I don't know.
Well, I think that's a really great segue. That's an interesting idea. Let's count the reasons why that could be possible. Totally speculatory, no idea, but if we take examples from other insects that are commercially reared, like lady beetles, for example, there could be commercial cultures of the insect that have pathogens. That's happened with predatory mites before. That's happened with lady beetles before. I have videos on my YouTube channel regarding that. It's not something a lot of biocontrol companies like to talk about. And to their credit, I don't think that happens very often. They have like I was just singing the praises of, I mean it. They have entomologists who are personnel that are hired specifically to quality control and make sure these things don't happen. But mistakes happen, especially early on. And when ecological understanding of a lot of these organisms literally happened because we thought we could use them as biocontrol agents before we understood them in totality. Not that we understand them in totality now, but
But
anyways, my
yeah,
point is that it could be pathogens. It could be they might eat. They might have intra-guild predation. So maybe those Oreuses feed on the eggs of the native ones if they come across them,
right.
or their nymphs.
That's kind of what I was concerned. That was my main thought, was that in some way they're able to impact the numbers, and that was sort of disappointing. But at this point I'm committed to this program, and so I have placed an order for more of the aureus, some rove beetles, and some Neocelius cucumaris.
Very
And
good.
what's that?
I said very good.
Yes, and so that was following. Like I said, I got 3 weeks ago. I saw these thrips. It was 2.5 weeks ago. I saw these thrips. So the first spray I did was neem with pyrethrin and BT. 5 days later, I did spinosad, and then 7 days later, I did Stuff Oil X, and that was just yesterday that I sprayed it. So of course, it's raining today on my plants, and I sprayed Stuff Oil yesterday. But the efficacy of that is only like 12 to 24 hours anyway, so it's going to be what it's going to be. But the idea being that BCAs work, but if you have an outbreak, I tend to recommend some serious knockdown sprays. And I'm not talking Avid. I'm not talking Eagle 20. Just neem oil, pyrethrin, spinosad, Stuff Oil, and even Bavaria bassiana, I know for aphids can be really effective. For thrips, is Bavaria good for thrips?
I have found it to be the case in my experience, but like you're saying, like all biocontrol agents, you got to use it right. A lot of Bavaria bassiana products are kind of expensive to use in a very large amount. This is true for other biocontrols as well. Another reason why they're very hard to use and why people sometimes have, especially in the past, have been very trepidatious and also very disappointed with how they ended up being.
Nematodes
Um,
fall into that category really well because they require a very aqueous medium to survive or to thrive. And my understanding is that if you're not reapplying them weekly, which can get really costly, you're not really using them.
Definitely, in a lot of cases. I actually recently worked with somebody who was dealing with a fungus gnat issue, and we utilized one application of not fungus gnats, of a Steinernema feltiae for fungus gnat larvae, and it worked like a charm, and it killed tons of them en masse. The fungus gnat population had been steadily building up and building up and building up, and we were able to tank their population. But like you say about the thrips, it's management, right? Because even in this greenhouse system that I'm referring to, the greenhouse has many ingress points, and as long as you have points of ingress, the small insects are going to get through. So really,
it's managing to an economic threshold is the term I've used
yeah.
to like, you can see one, but if you see 10, you have a problem.
Oh, Saltwater here, who has been laying down great comments, by the way. I'm seeing them. Some of these comments are pretty nice. Um, which, by the way, shout out to Saltwater _ because he was exactly the person I was thinking about when you were referring to people who really think of like subtle things regarding like arthropods and animals and that sort of a thing. So shout out to him. I really like the conversations we have. He was asking what was the nematode. That's Steinernema, so SteinerNema, and then Feltiae, Feltiae, Feltiae technically, but sometimes I pronounce them wrong because even though I took a class of Latin and I love Latin and I love languages, my American upbringing has messed that up sometimes. But um, who cares about the arcana anyways, right? Like
Well,
we're here for the practical info.
there's two sides to every coin, right?
Right. Maybe saying the right word is maybe more fundamental.
But when it
uh,
comes to communication, if you want to share information, you better get it right.
right. Spinoza 415 in the comments with
There it is. Yep.
there's definitely the correct name. So appreciate you putting that out there in the comments for people to refer to. Um,
You can take a look at
yeah.
some.
So
Um, let's
the
see.
American one with the Keens is right. I do care. I do care. I do care. I do like to say the right word.
Trust data.
Trust data. It says okay. It's trust data, and then you have data and lore,
Star
not
Trek.
lore.
Yes,
Trust data, not lore.
I love it. I
Don't
love
do
it.
it. Don't do it.
I
Don't
love
do it, brother.
my wife
Brother.
across from me laughing. She knows I love that so much.
Oh man, I love Lieutenant Commander Data. Like for many people, is like my favorite character on the Next Generation. So
Yeah.
definitely,
I mean,
and it's true.
Next Gen is great, but I can go all the way back to the '60s and watch Shatner just really work that science.
Yeah, he works a lot of things. Mostly the script.
Oh God, that was good. Okay, so Thrips.
Yeah, Thrips.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like so when it becomes when it's a season for thrips and there's a lot of thrips coming in, like yeah, like you don't, especially in an outdoor situation, you're not going to have complete control. You just don't allow that to enter your mind. It's really a question of management to, like you say, an economic threshold. Um, and that's just kind of how it is. I've worked with people in Northern California in the Humboldt area and up in the mountains, and they would get like bean thrips. I'm pretty sure I saw like what was the it's in my thrips playlist on YouTube, which is not meant to be a plug, but I guess it will be now. But where the it was like Kalagi?
Oh man, I just watched it. So, yeah.
Did you? Yeah, Oro Thrips, was it? Was it Oro Thrips? Let me look.
There was one that was like Kaka something.
Yeah, Orothrips Kalagi and Orothrips Yosemite.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
I was I
right.
was pretty sure in that video. I was pretty sure I came across them, but honestly, you would need to mount them and do that sort of a thing. And that was in Humboldt. I think that they were probably actually bean thrips, because they have the same banding and they're way more common, and the people were growing beans too. So, I
I didn't
mean,
have. I don't think I had bean thrips. Although I haven't seen a good identification for the thrips that I saw in my plants.
hmm
And I'm in El Dorado County, so Northern California, not as northern as Humboldt. Um, so they were. I would say the largest one I saw was like must have been like a 32nd of an inch or 16th of an inch. Okay, so they were small.
hmm
Uh, and excuse my American measurement.
I'm an
Um,
American, but I have trouble with the carpentry speak.
okay, so where we don't cross paths.
Yeah.
But okay, so they were really small in comparison to a lot of the research I've done on thrips.
Uh-huh.
They were, what's a good word for this? They were floppy. They were like, they weren't very like direct in their movement. When their reaction to me approaching them was very like just fly up and jump a couple inches away, like fly up and jump, just a little jump fly action that really
Mm.
wasn't very effective, but effective enough for like whatever their predators might be, I presume. But
Yeah. Thrips,
and they were small, they were black. The
uh-huh.
adults were black with no stripes.
Let me ask you this: did it have a long? Do you remember if like the last segment, if you can call, if you even can recall,
Hmm.
with enough granularity, did it have like a long tail at the end, sort of, or no?
No, it didn't look like a long tail. It looked like a small tail, a very small tail with almost like a beard around it.
Hmm.
Like
But
not a beard,
would you say like it was elongated?
a tiny bit. You're talking about just the tail or the whole? I mean, it looked like a little cigar, and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
tail, yes, was like a mock of an antenna almost, but very small.
Yeah. So okay, so I'm gonna guess that you might have actually been looking at a member of the Tubulifera, which are typically not, although some are, um, feeders of like plant tissue. A lot of them are fungivores. A lot of them also feed on pollen. So that's a plant resource, right? But um,
Right.
the Tubulifera tend not to be super big pests. And I don't think I've seen any on cannabis, but that doesn't mean that those aren't happening. Um, but it could be, like that kind of a thing is possible. The Thripidae, Thripidae, again, Thripidae family is it encompasses most of the pest species, and that's in a totally different subfamily. Suborder. Yeah. So,
Okay. Um,
yeah.
I'm looking at this now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it is it a type of syrup or is it not?
Tubulifera is a group.
Okay, check it out.
Yeah.
So this thing is
Yeah.
not what it was. This is not what it was.
Okay, right, right.
It looked like this, sort of.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, with a small, it's small, but there's like a little elongated the last segment.
Yeah, exactly. Just oh shoot, hang on. Just this section here.
Yeah. 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 So those tend to not so all of the ones in that group, the tube Alephra has sort of a tube at the end, and they tend to not be, in my experience, problems for cannabis at least. Um,
See, and I had most definite thrip damage. This is actually more what it looked like, but with no stripes or wings. Hang on, I found a better picture.
yeah, right. I believe that's also in that group. Um,
So at first they were feeding on pollen, and I even made a post like, oh, I'm not worried about this. The actually I didn't talk about this, but the thrips were eating the pollen. I was assuming that they were just going to eat the pollen and leave, but I sprayed anyway, and I saw damage.
mhm.
Those it
So
was
yeah, I mean, I think this is a good point to point. This is a good juncture to point out that sometimes like observations of one person are different than another's, and especially in such a new crop like cannabis. You can also get, like, for example, innocuous. You can get a bunch of incidental pests all at once, and they can cause a problem sort of just by their presence. Like you're saying, when you're getting hundreds in the air, thrips have a name in English that's sort of a historical name, and that's thunderbug. And they were called thunderbugs because they were associated with the changing in the barometric pressure. Not that people would describe it that way, but when the weather patterns changed, you got you got wind and lightning and thunder and that sort of a thing. So you notice that sometimes thrips are kind of weak flyers, despite the fact, partly because they have a flying system that literally breaks their own wings, and partly because um, it's just not a very efficient system. They rely on the wind and the atmosphere, like a lot of insects do, by the way, that are small, to kind of carry them up and out. And as long as they can sort of get into that current, then they can kind of ride that current a short
right.
distance or a long distance. And um, that is why they're called thunderbugs, because atmosphere changing and the winds changing allows them to move. And if you're getting thousands of them at once because of the wind, like, don't think you're a bad grower. Don't think you're like not putting enough preventative controls or something like that, because that's not really what's happening. What's happening is that you're getting rained on,
Yep.
literally. Yeah. Yeah, you
And
wouldn't say that about somebody who is living in a place where it rains, right? You wouldn't be like, oh, you might say, well, maybe you should protect your plants from overwatering, you know, but I wouldn't say that you're a bad grower because that happened.
no, what makes you a bad grower is not reacting.
Right.
And for years, I've been doing this for a very long time, and for years, I waited till I saw damage to do anything. And
Hmm.
it's only in the last few years I started scouting and learning about IPM and stuff. And
But to be honest, that's also a legitimate tactic if you don't have the resources or you're on your own or that sort of a thing. Um, that's sometimes helpful, but I do agree with you. Preventative crop scouting is pretty much universally better if you can
yeah,
do it.
yeah, yeah, just being with your plants. My favorite saying is, there's nothing better for your plants than your shadow.
Right? It's the best fertilizer that a farmer can apply.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Um, well, okay. There's we talked about the BCAs that I ordered, and I'll keep you updated on how effective they are. And I should tell you, after I sprayed with, so I did neem pyrethrin BT, and then I did Spino. And after the Spino, I didn't see any more thrips.
Hmm.
Still sprayed the suff oil, and I'm still gonna obviously apply BCAs, but it definitely was effective. And if anybody is in this area, in this Northern California area, and they're dealing with thrips right now, it's everywhere. And I think, like you were saying, it doesn't make you a bad grower. It just means you're subject to what the rest of us are going through, and we're in it
Right.
together. We're better off helping each other than telling each other we're doing stuff wrong. I mean, yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, not that that shouldn't happen, but I think a lot of younger growers sort of want to reach out and make a name for themselves, and the best way to do that is to be steadfast in your approach and have a multifaceted IPM, and keep at it, because this stuff is very dynamic and there's so many levels to it, and that's what makes it so fun, is you can keep learning, keep growing as a person as you grow plants. And what about the consumers? Do you mean in terms of the sprays that we're using, MG? I'm assuming that he's talking about the spinosad or the pyrethrin or something, and these things.
Saltwater also mentions like how they affected pill bugs and Jerusalem crickets, and he's asking what they might do to beneficials too. So I'll really quickly mention before you go in about consumption that spinosins. The reason why some people are reticent to use spinosins, he was referencing what I'm about to say. That
Mhm.
no, I didn't say systemic. I did say translaminar, but earlier I've said like possibly systemic, and the reason why is that in some cases it does have a residual translaminar effect where it can enter into the tissues and reside for a period of time. But it's different and for different plants, and I think that's the reason why legally the spinosad isn't necessarily allowed for cannabis right now, at least in California.
Mhm.
But it's possible that we'll find that that's not a big problem. Maybe in vegetative states, I don't know enough really to really make a I can't give people advice really on that perspective. Only as much as I know, which is I'm not a physical chemist, not even a biochemist. But
Just a hobby
um,
biochemist.
yeah, right. But I think that it's possible that spinosins aren't necessarily such a big problem, but I really just don't know.
You know,
So
uh, I don't think that the reason that these things are limited is because so many people are uneducated about how to use them, and they have to take something away if we can't figure out how to use it correctly. And
mm-hmm.
California like the epitome of taking things away when you can't use them correctly. And so that, spinosyn definitely follows suit there. And, if you're using it during flowering, it's, don't sell me your flower, I guess is what I got to say. But I thought you were gonna. But it is an effective knockdown spray during the vegetative growth stage.
Definitely, and pyrethrin too is kind of in that same boat where it's like, is there systemic action? Is there translaminar action? Is the piperonyl butoxide in the pyrethrin gonna, enhance the effect of lethality? Sure, but will it be in the plant? All these, just for people who don't know, I was talking to somebody, I think in Marone's company, I believe. Yeah, I can't remember his name. Was it Kent? Keith? Anyways, regardless, we were talking about pesticide registrations of several years ago and how it's very arduous for people to do that, and love it or hate it, or whether they're biopesticides or chemical agents or whatever. California, like typically you have an entire section of your company devoted to California registration, and then you have everyone else
Yep.
because they're so fastidious about that, which in my opinion I kind of appreciate. I kind of would rather that than the alternative, because they actually require you to have efficacy data for anything you put on there in a
Yeah.
much more stringent way, which I'm not trying to be anti-business here, because that does require like hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of research, but like which
It's,
one would you,
where do you want to be? I mean, as an entomologist, wonderful place to be because,
sure.
nature rules here. As a grower, maybe a medium place to be because it's sort of hard to utilize all the potential resources.
Right. And so I definitely empathize with people who are in this situation. I visited a hemp grower seminar in San Diego, in um, Lucadia, which is north, and North San Diego, north in Southern California, anyways. And there was a lot of there was a lot of sort of problems with regards to the Department of Pesticide Regulation coming in and not really having answers for these hemp growers about what they can and cannot use and what's legally allowed. And so, I mean, if the DPR representative is putting their hands up, I have to do the same,
Yep.
right?
Yep. And that
So,
kind of sucks a little bit, right?
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm not here telling people that they're wrong or bad people for using certain compounds like that. Like people just don't know, and
Yeah.
yeah, ignorance is not the same as being malicious. Of course, you can have bad things happen out of ignorance all the time, but I have a feeling that it's probably not as bad. It's definitely not as bad as like abamectin or
Right.
methylbutanil or
It's not
imidacloprid.
the same scale. It doesn't even
No.
compare. These are organic pesticides. Their residuals are anywhere from like 12 hours to 7 days. Neem oil. I wanted to talk a little bit about neem oil just briefly. Has a really cool, effective window of 7 days. I love using neem oil because I can take a breath of fresh air and do some research on what I need to do once I've applied neem oil to the plants if I have an outbreak of something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At the same time, I think it was Saltwater underscore that asked a really good question. Let me go back. He said, "Does neem kill the BT?" Because I've been using BT with my neem oil for a very long time, and my experience is that neem oil, being a suffocant, doesn't kill the bacteria. Bacteria are able to survive in that aqueous solution, I think. What's your thoughts on that?
Neem oil does have antimicrobial effects sometimes. Depends on the microbe. Um, Neem, so as a directin and various other compounds that are from neem trees
Mm-hmm.
can have various sort of insecticidal, acaricidal, so insect killing, mite killing, fungicidal, and generally antimicrobial effects. But like because it's sort of relying on this like chemical compound or sort of slew of similar chemistries that are naturally occurring in the neem plant, and then sometimes not if the pesticide is sourced improperly,
Right.
um, then it's sort of case by case for different organisms. And when we talk about the soil microbiome and the phylosphere and the rhizosphere and the pedosphere and all these different spheres of influence, it's hard to sort of talk broadly about that. And you can also have like a sublethal dosage. So you might apply it and it'll have a sublethal effect on an organism. That's why like with predatory mites and other sorts of things, you'll sometimes see people say that a biocontrol agent is not killed by, or sometimes they conflate that with being not affected by a certain pesticide. And
Right.
it's like, maybe, but maybe what happens is that the predatory mite, let's say Swirsky, for example, or Cucumeris, let's say the females abort their ova after being applied because of stress or some sort of toxic reaction. So maybe they'll still kill some things, or maybe they're just still like running around, but they're not actually doing their job. Maybe they won't eat. Maybe they're moribund. They're going to die. So they might look fine, but you don't really know always.
Yeah.
You got to be careful sometimes with the unintended effects. Same thing with it's kind of the same thing what you're saying with the aphidious wasps and other biocontrol agents. You
Yeah.
might have a negative effect on the ecosystem locally.
So I guess I'm going to stop throwing my BT. I mean, the BT has been effective. I don't have caterpillar problems, but maybe just as a precaution, I will not throw my bacteria-based treatments in with my antibacterial.
And it's important to consider that, like, for example, if you're using a BT, so if you're using a Bacillus thuringiensis product, but you're actually not using the living organism, you're just using like the cry proteins that are created by the bacillus and are not actually alive,
Uh-huh.
then that's different.
Okay, that is
But
very interesting. Is there a product that is just those cry proteins?
oh yeah, oh yeah. And also, so like when that happens, usually it's for organisms that mechanically chew the plant. So, and there's different Bacillus thuringiensis subspecies, as you know, different strains, right?
Right.
So some are for caterpillars, some are for flies, various flies. Some are for thrips. That might not be true, but like for different, basically like soft-bodied organisms or more specific groups or things like this. And when you're talking about the cry proteins, they usually have to be ingested. So for the caterpillars, for example, you have to apply it, and you also have to apply it before they reach a certain level of maturity, or they will because again, when people tell me this, oh, if my plant's healthy enough, it'll stave off anything. This is just not true at all in any way, and I'm happy to explain this in more detail. A healthier plant will absolutely do better, but
I can tell you,
they
I've had the
literally
plants I've
say
ever
that
had.
again?
I can tell you, I've had the healthiest plants of my entire life get destroyed by aphids.
Mm-hmm.
Go
Because
ahead.
that's what they do. That's how they evolved for million. We just went over this millions of years,
Yep.
hundreds of millions of years.
Yep.
They've the things that let them be successful are the things that let them be successful now, and it's a fundamental ability to um, destroy or uh, overmatch or impair the immune system of the plants, either because they pierce the physical barrier and then use effector proteins or some sort of genetic interaction or chemical agents or all these sorts of things, or they just processed out the toxins that they produce, or you know
Right.
what I mean, like
Yeah.
so with caterpillars, that's a big thing. A lot of caterpillars are able to sort of sequester toxins. Sometimes they use them to protect themselves from predators, right? The spotted lanternfly does that with its nymphs. It's not a caterpillar, but when it feeds on Tree of Heaven, there's an alkaloid, I think is an alkaloid, that is in Tree of Heaven that basically makes them poisonous to a lot of things. And so, natural predators might be able to have no problem in their origin in like middle China kind of area, Eastern Asia. But in North America, no, nothing evolved around that. So why would you expect that to be the case? Why do you think that there's a biocontrol agent always that can affect it in your local area? There is not always, and that's the major problem with invasive species. Hopefully that
You
went
broke up
through.
a little bit. I missed
You did.
the there was like a lag, but I think I picked up on what you're getting at.
You probably did. Yeah, I saw that on my end too. But yeah, so uh, I don't know. It's a very complex situation, and you can't just assume that a healthy plant will be effective in all cases in all situations. And that's why we breed cultivars that are more or less resistant. It's not because we don't know how to grow plants or that, I mean, it's not totally because of that, anyways. And, um, there's pathogens that exploit susceptibility genes. And, like when it's like, I have to wonder sometimes if people know basic things about plants. And I'm not saying that people are bad or like ignorant and can't cultivate well if they don't know these things. But if you don't know these things, it can make it seem like you're at fault when you're not really at fault, I guess.
Right. That's the problem with the community in general. It's it's step on each other to get up, and you end up just never getting anywhere scientifically. I think that's like a good place for us to wrap up, because that's kind of like what we represent is like all I want to do is like be a catalyst for your voice. I feel like that's what I like. That's why I like to chat with you, because I'm here in the garden every day, and I'm working to figure out what to do to fight these bugs, and you are just an incredible database, and and I hope that I can be a funnel of relevant information for the community from you.
I appreciate that.
So
Um,
yeah, me too.
I, I'm glad that we had these conversations, and I suppose that's a pretty accurate way to put it, is that ultimately at the end of the day, you and I, and that's why I like to talk to you about this sort of a thing, is that we have a similar outlook where, you know, um, people, agriculture, humans aren't necessarily like the bane of cultivation existence, and we have done a lot of things collectively to really screw it all up. But collectively, we can also do a lot of things to really help it and avert those problems. And I think that we agree that a lot of that comes from just scientific approaches and understanding how things are. Sometimes it's less practical than other things that we learn, but it all kind of comes together. And people who are smarter than both of us, or at least people who are researching such things that are very arcane, those can come down the pipe 10 years, 20 years later and
Right,
be some novel way to fight the problem. Maybe we
right,
get cryproteins that don't require us to apply them when the caterpillars are only young. Maybe we get a virus, like this is going to sound, probably this is the bad thing to talk about now, but maybe we get like a insect virus that's super specific, only affects caterpillars. They already have that, by the way. Those products exist. They're just very rare because they're very expensive to make, for one thing. And for another thing, they are um, hard to apply. So, but like cool new things like are on the horizon.
the bleeding edge, baby.
Yeah, the bleeding edge. So, yeah, let's wrap it up. I have no idea how much time we have, and I don't know if Instagram's going to let me save this or turn it into an IGTV. I'm fine with both. I could probably download it using some illicit app. If Instagram's going to make me do that, then I'm going to do that.
Cool. I
But
think it's man. I think this was a really good chat, and I mean, from the comments, people seem like they got a lot from it. Dude, salt water. I gotta be your friend, man. Holy mackerel, you're a smart guy. So
Holy
when you
mackerel was right. He definitely fishes. He
so when
definitely
you stick a celery cutting into food dye, it absorbs the dye. Does the
yes.
vascular system taking in another plant's extracts allow it to utilize those properties? I don't
Sometimes.
get back to me when you do that research, saltwater.
Yeah. Sometimes this is true. Sometimes this happens. Sometimes they get broken down. Sometimes they um just like with the insects, the same sort of thing happens. This is kind of how arthropods in general and insects in particular developed symbiotic relationships with microbes. And this is a topic for another conversation. But basically, the long story short is that a lot of early insects and arthropods, they fed on microbes or they fed on decaying organic matter with microbes. Well,
Right.
over 100 million years or so, some of those microbes, well, they establish and colonize in the gut. And some of those microbes are from groups that already knew how to decay or break down plant matter. So what happens?
That
Well,
is
those
good.
microbes,
Thank
right? So those
you.
insects that go on to eat plant material, the
Yeah.
microbes help break it down.
There's a
So
bacteria that absorbed some algae a long time ago that allowed it the ability to photosynthesize. I think is
right,
how. Right.
yeah. So that happened too, right? So symbioses have been very foundational, and in a
Yeah.
research report I posted about on my Instagram, they make no buts about it when they talked about the entire diversity of beetles. They say basically beetles were allowed to do well because they got microbes that allowed them to break down plant material and also break down plant defense compounds. And
Hmm.
then some of those genes were horizontally transferred to their own genome. So not only do they have them in the microbes, but they also have them in their own genes.
Right. That
And
is,
so
and that's a good answer for saltwater because I guess the answer is yes, it very well can.
it very well can. Chemical compounds probably even easier than horizontal gene transfer in most cases, right? So, but it's so every plant's a little bit different, and maybe you need the compound to be taken up in a special way, or maybe you need
Maybe
a big concentration for it to matter.
could be, or maybe you got to shoot it with a flake of gold around it from a DNA gun.
Right.
Yeah,
So, anyways, let's wrap it up. I could
cool.
talk forever, and I'll
We
see
could
if
all
this gets.
in like
Say
an
again.
hour. We're gonna talk again in an hour and a half.
That's true. That's true. So I'll take a short recess. It's 2:38 at 4 o'clock PST, Pacific Standard Time. We will talk about more biocontrols and thrips and aphids and all kinds of stuff. I'm excited. Looking forward to seeing you on the panel.
Yes, I'm excited to join the panel and to learn as much as I can.
Well, excellent, man. I will talk to you soon, Aaron.
Yeah, good talking to you, Matt.
Cool.
Later.